The first item on the agenda is to review the 2002 sales tax fund financials of fiscal year ending June 30, 2020. So if you would, I provided, everyone have a hard copy? Okay. I provided a copy of the unaudited financial statements for the 2002 tax. You see revenues of about $25.9 million. Total expenditures of $27.5 million, for a net result of a deficit of $1.6 million. Of course, that deficit, if you'll notice in the expenditures, the last item in the expenditure section is the distribution of the previous year's 14th check. So that check in essence should be distributing the excess from the previous year, but it gets recorded in 20 because the check is processed in October of 19. So that's not something that that surprises us. In other words, it sort of happens each year. So that's where we finished the year for 20. We had a beginning fund balance of $17.6 million. So we net the deficit against the beginning fund balance, and you come up with a ending operational fund balance of $16,070,000. So that number will be key, because when we go to the second agenda item, you'll see how that factors into that calculation. So any questions on the financials or comments? We're somewhat fortunate in that, with the impact of COVID-19, our collections through the end of March last year, March of 19, March of 20, were actually ahead of the prior year's collection and ahead of budget, which was a godsend because April, May, and June, the bottom pretty much fell out. We were 9-10% under last year's collections, and comparable with regards to the budget. So we basically finished up with about 2.5% decrease in collections from the previous year. So where we were, about 2.5%. So where we finished the year was an indication. It reflected somewhat what happened in the months of April through June, but 2.5% compared to the 10% that we actually experienced those last 3 months gives you an idea of where we were at the end of March. We were that much better up until we started experiencing the impact of COVID-19. So I did want to make mention of that. Yes, ma'am.
So this last one, the reserve, that's like the reserve that we would pay out of, like this last number where it says reserves, like that's the number, that's the balance you would pay out of if something came up short from year to year?
That, the 16 million?
Yeah.
So if you don't mind, we'll answer that question when we get to the second agenda item, because we're actually gonna work through how that number factors in. So if people hold on to that, we'll come back to it. Any other questions with regards to the financials? Okay, agenda item 2.2, recommendation for declaration of excess distribution. For this particular agenda item, we prepared 3 scenarios. The first scenario is a scenario that just looks at the excess or the fund balance, the ending fund balance, the 16 million that we just got through reviewing, and assumes that there would be, or recommends that there would be no salary increase. In other words, we'll take the full amount as a 14th check. We just wanted it for comparison service purposes. Scenario 2 and scenario 3 are a follow-up. If you remember, in September of last year, the board directed staff to review the Blue Ribbon Committee recommendations from last year. And so these scenarios are part of that review. We're sort of taking off from where we left off last year with the Blue Ribbon Committee's recommendation. So the first scenario, it may be one you're interested in, but it basically shows the calculation that we've been doing for a number of years and been following for a number of years. This is the calculation that the board has typically approved. So I would ask, since there is no, in this particular scenario, you'll notice the first line under that column, under scenario 1, it says no annual salary increase. It's in bold, just to sort of get our attention. So the first section does not apply at all. Those calculations only take effect if there's a salary increase, or only or applicable if there's a salary increase. So the first line item shows the fiscal year 20 fund balance residual after the reserve for the fiscal year 10 and fiscal year 15 increase of $1,000 to the salary set. So going back to the question we had about the $16,070,000, here's where that number comes into play. This $4,070,626 is the net of, you take your starting number is your ending balance of that $16,070,000. Then we set aside a reserve that the Blue Ribbon Committee set years ago of $6 million to shelter against economic downturns. So you subtract 16 million from that 6 million from that 16,070,000. Then there is a reserve for 1 year's worth of the fiscal year 10 increase. There's also a reserve of 3 million for the fiscal year 15 salary increase, and that brings us down to $4,070,626. So you can see how that 16,070,000 plays into the calculation. Everyone with me up to this point as to how we come up to the $4,070,000, and to that we incorporate the Blue Ribbons Committee's recommendation of taking those reserves out for the fiscal year 10 and fiscal year 15 salary increases from 100% to 80%. So in essence, we're adding back 1.2 million to those two line items that we just got through subtracting for the fiscal year 10 and fiscal year 15 increases, 3 million each. We're adding back 600,000 to that. So in essence, we're reserving 2.4 million at this point, not the 3 million for each of those increases. So that ends up increasing what's available for the excess distribution. That 20% is an add-on to what the excess of residual fund balance that's remaining. So it totals to 5.2 million, 5,276,26, and based on an employee count of eligible employees of 2,234, and calculating or providing for benefits of 27.25, and that's basically retirement and Medicare. It results in a 14th check of $1,854.05. So if the Blue Ribbon Committee decides that they're not interested in recommending a combination of a salary increase and 14th check, this is the amount that we would be looking at. So that's scenario 1. Any questions before we move on to scenario 2?
Just to clarify, our current status of the reserve fund is approximately, or is 10.8 million for the 2002 sales tax in total, 6
Yes.
million original, and then the
4.8, yes, that's
Okay.
correct. That's correct. Scenario 2, in that particular scenario, we start out with a salary increase of $725. We took a look at 1,000, and that basically eliminated any 14th check. And in the event that we were interested in a combination of the two, I plugged in the amount that would generate a 14th check that had some meaning, still had some substance for our employees, our eligible employees. So if you take a look at the numbers, the $725 per individual, eligible individual benefits of $198, bringing the total cost per eligible employee to $923. You multiply that times the number of eligible employees, it comes out to about 2.1 million. You multiply it times the cost of that salary increase to fund it for the current year, as well as setting a reserve aside of 80% of the cost for the future year. So we have basically 80% of that cost one year ahead of us. You know, it's just good planning, especially when you look at what we're experiencing right now, because the only other place to take that funding or to look for that funding, if it's not there, is the general fund. So the cost there is 3.7 million total, and we're adding to that. That's the cost, so it's shown as a negative. And here's our fiscal year 20 fund balance residual, $4,070,000. That number doesn't change from scenario 1. Neither does the add back of going from 100% to 80% for those reserves that we set up for the fiscal year 10 and 15 increases. So the net result is an excess funds available for an excess distribution, or that 14th check, of about $1.6 million, $1,559,058, and that calculates to right at $548.43. So what this means is we could reflect in the teacher salary schedule an increase of an annual increase of $725. And if that particular recommendation is the one the Blue Ribbon Committee goes with and the one the board chooses, realistically, we probably would not see the increase taking effect until November. Because the board's going to, if it is approved or presented, it's going to be presented at the October 14th meeting. Well, if there's an increase involved, then all of the calculations, all the salary schedules have to be the salary schedules have to be changed, and ALEO has to be set up to reflect that increase. So ultimately, that's not going to happen until November, which is pretty much in line with what occurred in 2010 and what occurred in 2015. It's no different. We want to make sure we get it right. So it's going to be a prorated amount. You know, it'll be two less months of that 725, but in future years it'll be the full 725.
Billy,
Yes.
I just want to point out in this that 1.2 million is a one-time thing. So what you're looking at, you're really getting out $500 is going to be a one-time thing. So if this would have happened next year, you'd possibly have no 14th check. Everything being the same or even reduced due to COVID, you may have no 14th check next year. Because really, if you look at this, it's almost break even. So the 548 is coming from the 1.2 one-time money. That's not going to happen next year.
Realistically, that's the question that I had.
Yes.
We're at about the maximum that we're going to be able to pull out from the sales tax at the current levels. And realistically, it'd have to go up 10% for us to even think about another $500.
Right.
So we're pretty much topped out, or will be topped out. If we do 725, you're pretty much, that's everything in that 2002 sales tax going forward from here until we have a sizable increase in the sales tax base.
That's correct. That's correct. So that's sort of a, I don't want to say break even, but that 1.2 million generates a little over $400 14th check. So that 548, everything else being equal, I'm saying the same thing Matt said, give or take $100. You know, at best, if nothing changes, if our sales tax collections remain constant, we would expect no more than $100 14th check next year. Maybe even no 14th check, because if the sales tax collections go down, I think what Matt just said would be applicable. And the jury's still out on that one. Every month is a new adventure, because there's so many things happening each month. So very appreciate that comment on that. Any questions with regards to scenario 2? So scenario 3 is just taking it down a bit, where we don't put quite as much. We put $500 into the salary schedule, and as an annual increase, and that equates to a 14th check of $954 for the current October distribution. So if we consider what Matt just said and how it applies to this scenario, you can basically, that 1.2 million also being in this calculation and also only being available one time, because once we distribute it, it's not there anymore. That number is going to be closer to $500
Subsequent years.
in subsequent years. So in scenario 2, it'd probably be 0 or very close to it in terms of the 14th check. We're saying, or the Blue Ribbon Committee would be saying, well, we want it pretty much all of it in the salary schedule. Scenario 3 says we want some in the salary schedule, and we'd still like to see at least a $500 check, 14th check next year. Not this one. This one would be about $954. But in 21, it would be about $500. Any questions on scenario 3?
If we were looking at scenario 3 with $500 salary increase, what effect would that have on other salary scales besides teachers, like the administrative salary scale? Would there be another cost associated with that that's passed on to the general fund? So the administrators and those that are on a professional pay scale, salary schedule, who are not paid off of the teacher salary schedule because they're not eligible for a 2002 sales tax distribution, they're on the instructional salary schedule. And that salary schedule was created several years back when the board opted, at least initially, not to give that same increase, salary increase, to the non-eligible profession. And it wasn't until later that they went back and approved it, that the two salary schedules are now equal again. But that is a separate decision by the board. If this recommendation is made, or whatever recommendation is made by the Blue Ribbon Committee, let's just assume the board approves it. Those individuals that are paid off of that instructional salary schedule are not included because their increase, if the board were to approve it, will be funded through the general fund. It will not be taken out of 2002 sales tax because they do not meet the board dedicated or defined classroom teacher, and they weren't in that definition. So to answer your question, let's just for a moment assume that the board says decides that, well, yes, we want to fund the $500 increase for those individuals as well. Your psychologists, your social workers, your nurses, some of the instructional coaches, those types of folks who are getting paid off of the instructional salary schedule, then the cost would be right at about $200,000 that the general fund would have to assume. So that gives you an idea, just to answer your question. But that is a separate decision, that the board would have to make.
The administrators, assistant principals, and principals also.
Yes, that's indexing the principals as well as the assistant principals. That includes the cost of that index.
Of the 200,000
It
additional,
does.
if the board went in that direction, okay.
That's correct.
So we're not talking about another 2 or 3 million out of the general fund, okay.
No, no. That's correct. So I think, let's see, I may have something. So on average, because years of experience impacts this, for the principals, the $500 would be indexed to about 692. And assistant principals to about 611 because of the index. In total, we have about 275 employees who are on the instructional salary schedule who would not be part of this $500 increase if the Blue Ribbon Committee recommends it. That'll be a board consideration, something that they'll have to look at if they so choose at the board meeting. But the funding source would be the general fund, not the 2002 sales tax. But that's the estimated cost. Any questions with regards to scenario 3? Before I'm basically gonna put it out there and ask for a motion in terms of the direction and the recommendation that the Blue Ribbon Committee might be interested in making to the board.
I have a question. So back in the spring when they had originally put this on there was a $250 option to. Did you guys look at that again? Because whenever it was on the agenda and they decided to defer it, they did a $250 option too. Did you guys look at that again?
We can put as many scenarios as we'd like. On the $250 scenario, when you spread that over 12 months, it's almost you don't see it. You don't see it. So our concern would be that. Although it's well-intentioned as it is, and there's logic to it, at the end of the day, their 14th check got decreased, and they're seeing so very little of that 112 to 250, $20 a month, and then taxes, it just wouldn't be noticeable.
And then I had a second question about, it was actually back on the first agenda item, so I'm sorry, but the lower class size of the 2.7, how many positions is that funding right now? Like how many whole salaries are coming out of the 2002 sales tax?
I believe, I don't know it, I don't know the amount by category, but in total, we were, I want to say at the 40, in the 45 to 50 range.
For which time period?
For the lower class size and
Yeah.
the tutoring instruction, extra instruction.
Yep, in August there was 45.
So the original number when we first started was 120. So it has been going down each year as those employees in those specific positions retire.
So, and as less people come off of that check, that would increase, off of that source fund, that would mean more money available for the 14th check, or?
That would be more available funds in the 2002 sales tax. And then, there are other dedications, but ultimately, one of the considerations would be the excess check. So I'm going to say excess distribution. So I'm going to say yes, it would be eligible and available for that if that's what the board chooses.
So if that continues to go down, that would mitigate some of the problems about maxing out, if that number were to be decreased
Over time.
over time?
It's been this decrease from 120 to where we are now has been probably over a decade. Well,
15 years or more.
yeah. So it hasn't been it's been a gradual process. It just takes time, as these individuals retire. So it's a slow occurring. You're seeing the impact spread out over a number of years.
Could you elaborate on the context there? So there were 120 teachers hired at one point, you're saying? I'm just trying to understand.
So, way back in year one, when specific teachers were assigned the lower class size dedication, they were associated or they were added as a result of that dedication. They fell under that category. You had others that fell under the tutoring and extra instruction dedication. You add the two together, it was 120 teaching slots at that point in time, when the tax first passed, that were being charged against this tax, being funded with this tax, 100% of their salary. When the first salary increase, fiscal year 10, when that came about, one of the discussions that we had was, okay, we'll recommend, Blue Ribbon Committee, we'll recommend funding that $1,000 increase. However, as these positions that were originally charged to 2002 sales tax fund under the lower class size and tutoring and extra instruction, as those individuals retire, their replacements would be moved to the general fund. They would no longer be charged against the 2002 tax. So the idea being, or the logic being, we understand that that the general fund couldn't absorb taking 120 and moving them all at one time. So we're doing it as they retire, and it's just sort of spreading it out and making it more manageable for the general fund to take them in upon those retirements.
Got it.
That's very awesome questions.
I have one more question.
Sure.
So you said the sales tax that in March, when everything kind of closed down, you said we were ahead. Do you know like how much down we are per, like, you know, like April, May, June, July? Do you know like what's the percent difference between this year and last year?
Okay, so our fiscal year ends on June 30. So the numbers that we're looking at right now captures through June 30. And so we can almost set that aside because we've taken care of that already. So that leaves us with July and August, which September is not quite in yet. We won't know that for a few more days. But the July and August collections for sales tax 2002 are up over last year by about $65,000, which in the big picture, I look at that as sort of break even because the numbers are so large that, yes, it is $65,000, that's a lot of money. But when you look at, the millions that are collected for the year, that's roughly about a break even, which is wonderful news. We were not expecting to be at a break even point 2 months into the new school year. We're very, very pleasantly surprised with that, and we're monitoring it. Our collections, the returns are due on the 20th of the subsequent month. So in September 20th, we started collecting returns that reflected July sales. Okay, so you have from the 20th really until probably into the first week of October. We're looking at that every day. And it's a cash basis. It's not something where we can say, oh, we know about how much is out there. We record this as the collections are made. It's on a cash basis. So it won't be until probably October 7th, October 10th before we know how we get in September. And it might be something where, it might be a situation where I hope that that 65,000 increases, but that amount can easily be wiped out and it go the other way in 1 month's period of time. 65,000 is not a lot of money when you're dealing with either one of either the 66 1% tax or the 88 half-cent tax or the 2002 half-cent tax. It can, those swings are not unusual during times like these. So I'm not trying to rain on all parade, but we just need to have an awareness that we've off to a good start, but we still have to monitor it for several more months to get comfortable as to where we truly stand.
And those months included, and this is a national thing, those months included the $600 a month unemployment checks that ended.
Right.
So I think you had a bridge there where the economy is actually doing pretty good. Now, it's yet to be seen what the hurricane will happen, but yet that'll be temporary too. You know, a lot of people from Lake Charles have moved here, filled the hotels, shopping at Lowe's. If you've been to Lowe's, you know, it's hard to get to buy anything at this point. So you might see a temporary bump there, maybe offset by not having that $600 a week for a lot of people that are receiving those benefits that are now getting way, way less. So from a national perspective, you know, a lot of people were saying seeing stability, but it's yet to be seen how that 600 plays out. As people run through their savings or.
I'm really concerned about scenario 2. I think we are so close to our max that we're able to actually fund salaries out of the tax at current levels, that there's still a lot of unknowns there. Myself personally, there's no way I could recommend scenario 2. Scenario 3, the $500, I can see room for that. I think that's still a decent sized check, 14th check for the teachers to get. I also could go with scenario 1, just a full check. I brought it up last time, I will bring it up again. Having that large lump sum money, $1,800 as opposed to $900, encourages people to go out. I've been wanting a 60-inch TV, I'm gonna go get my 60-inch TV. And those sales tax rolls around again and again when they do that. I think the larger the distribution we make, I think the more that the money stays into the area. Whereas a smaller distribution, people pick it up and they say, you know what, I'm gonna spend an extra $100 on my Visa bill, and that money leaves our area. I could recommend either scenario 3 or scenario 1 personally. I probably lean towards scenario 1, trying to boost the economy a little bit more.
But with scenario 1, stress the budget, you know, as far as the 2002 tax fund right already. Will it stress it more or not, or belittle it, like we won't have much to deal with or handle with when it comes to the next year?
No, scenario 1 is past collections already. It has no effect on the future.
In scenario 1, the chances of having another larger, what it would say if you look at, when you take that 1,200 out, you're really looking at scenario 1 allows you to have another big check or to have the same choice next year, as opposed to if you take the 1,200 out, which will not, 1.2 million, excuse me, out of the calculation next year, you're looking at a very small 14 check under scenario 2 and a larger one under scenario 3, but not the ability to do another 1,800. If you look at the bottom, they kind of have a history of since 2006 of all the distributions that were made.
Right.
So you can kind of see where it's been in the past. And you know, feedback I get from my teacher friends is they like that big check because it allows them to go out and buy something of substance, a refrigerator, the down payment on a car. You know, it's a nice chunk of money that they, rather than splitting it up where they see a little bit here and there. Just the feedback I get basically is.
Well, we did a survey of our membership back in the spring, and about 92% of them expressed support for some type, one of the 3 raises. So we had about a 50% response rate on the surveys with about 450 teachers. And most of them, about 92%, said that they would favor some sort of raise. And then anecdotally, I know that the number that a lot of them, when it gets less than 1,000 or too far from 1,000, is that's when it's upsetting. Like if it can keep it close to 1,000, they would be happy to also get a raise. So I think that they would be happy with scenario, probably not with scenario 2, but with scenario 3.
Next,
I'd
if we do,
also like to mention that this was originally voted on by the public to give teachers a regular salary increase. If you look at every 5 years when they did it, you look at 10 and you look at 15, well, not 15, that was a little bit different, but if you look at 10, their check that get is a little bit smaller, because we know that we can't give them a salary increase every single year because they have to maintain that. But on the 5-year interval that we try to give a salary increase, because that's what it was voted for by the taxpayers, it does seem to bring down the little chunk money that the teachers get. So again, two, under the situation we're in, might put us in a little bit of a bind, but channel, number 3 at least gets them 500.
Now,
But
one of the things,
as I said, is our members also voted that they would like to see a permanent salary increase in their salaries. So that's why we're looking at either 2 or 3.
if you're going back in history and you look at 2010 when we did the $1,000 increase and we had a $380 check, in subsequent years we had like a $1,400 and $1,800 check. A lot of that you saw in the subsequent years, I do honestly believe was a reduction of teachers in that lower classroom size that freed up more money that was allowing that, as well as the sales tax base increasing. Like I said, I'm not opposed to scenario 3 with the $500 salary increase and the $900 raise, $900 14th check, excuse me, but realize we probably will not see next October $1,000 check. It will probably be closer to $400 to $500.
But that, and I know will be a possibility, a strong possibility, if we're not looking at a freeze on our pay, that's not even out of, and that's gonna be, as far as the pay freeze, that won't be a surprise because of the situation that we're in now.
Well, and I think last year that was discussed in the fact that we talked about that we would do the increase this year, and that way we could communicate to people that it would be smaller. So we could do the scenario 3 and then just communicate to teachers that, hey, we're giving you a raise, but due to economic circumstances, it's probably not going to be, $900 again next year. I think they would accept that as long as you tell them ahead of time, not...
Not surprise them the day before or whatever. It is imperative, that we do this, for our educators, that they have something that we can say, that we can have a raise or something that's going to have salary increase, because we know that was the purpose for that tax.
And we did discuss last year too, the 5-year interval kind of pattern that was said, 2010, 2015, this would be
And
2020.
the chances of the school board being able to maintain that salary over time.
So I would make a motion that we recommend scenario 3 to the board.
Yeah.
I'll second.
Second.
Sorry, may I have your name?
Delisa Washington. Delisa Washington.
Did you sign in, Ms. Washington?
I did, yes.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor, seconded that scenario 3 be the recommendation of the Blue Ribbon Committee. Call those in favor. Can you please raise your hands, and I'll take a count and see who you are so I can check it off. Give me just a minute. Okay, I have the yeses, those that are not in favor. Okay, so, does that mean you were in favor, scenario 1?
So scenario 1,
So
yes.
you're saying, I want to make sure I didn't.
Yeah.
This is. Excuse me. So, from a standpoint of total number of votes that could be cast, we have 5 out of 11 that are in favor. 2 abstentions and 4 absences. So with that said, 5 to 2, that will be the recommendation of the Blue Ribbon Committee to the board member at the October board meeting, which is on the 14th, October 14th, I believe.
Yes.
On October 14th. And that pretty much concludes our Blue Ribbon Committee meeting. We certainly appreciate all of you making your way over here, especially after the weather we experienced this afternoon. Hopefully some of that water has drained off.
It's gonna be cool.
So be careful going home and
Yes.
hopefully we have some cool weather to enjoy. Thank y'all. Appreciate it.
Thank you for answering all my questions.
Oh,
My favorite.
I have a question.